All right, number 76, subjective versus objective. And where do memories fit in all of that? That is the subject of today's video. As always, please like this one, comment on below, click the subscribe button. All those things help other people to see these videos. I'm excited about this one. I learned stuff about myself when sketching the outline for this video, and there's a chart to share at the end. Isn't that exciting? Okay, so subjective versus objective. When mediums connect, we get things subjectively, which is in our minds, it's a mental picture, and or objectively, where we experience it physically. So if you're talking visual, subjective would be in your head, seeing something in your head, like when you imagine repainting a room or rearranging a room, you're seeing that in your mind's eye. Objective would be the way I'm seeing the computer right now. So I'm going to just go through each sense and also talk about how memories play into that. So, and how they work for me, because it's different for everybody. So for me, I'm very visual. Most of the information I get, a slim majority I would say, is visual information, and most of it is subjective. So meaning I'm seeing it in my head. And most of that is memories. So before I get into that, I want to talk about the one time only in my entire life when I objectively saw someone in spirit the way I'm seeing the computer right now. It was years before I knew anything about mediumship. I was in my 20s. I was standing in line at work at the company cafeteria to pay for something. I accidentally backed into this guy, and I turned around to say, "Oh, excuse me," because I hit him pretty hard. And he looked exactly like my friend's dad, who was this old white guy. And when I bumped into him, I dropped something on the floor, and as I bent down to pick it up, I thought, God, he looks just like that man. And when I turned to him to say, "Hey, you look just like my friend's dad," he was this young 30-something Asian guy, looked nothing like my friend's father. And I thought, that's okay, that was super weird. Didn't think anything of it, just thought it was really weird. And then the next day, I got a phone call that friend's dad had passed. So I saw him the way I saw anybody else in the room. That is the one and only objective time I've seen someone in spirit ever. I've done over 850 readings, so I'm going to say for me, subjective is how I get things. And most of that is memory. So it's really normal for me. One of the things that happens to me is I often usually see someone in the room with me, but it's symbolic. So if I see my dad, it means I'm with your dad. If I see my mom's mom, I'm with your mom's mom. That's often how it works out for me. If I see someone famous, it's usually their name that I'm supposed to say. And so these are all memories, right? They're memories of things. But sometimes it's new experiences. So one time I was reading for this woman. I got her grandmother. I was seeing my mom's mom. But I was seeing my mom's mom playing tennis. I never knew my own grandmother to play tennis, and this woman's grandmother had regularly played tennis religiously every week. And so that was a new thing. I was like, wow, that's really interesting, because I'd never, when I remember them or see them in my mind doing something I never knew them to do while they were here, that's always been spot on 100%. So for me, visually, subjective is a lot stronger than objective. Hearing, I get both ways, subjectively and objectively. When I get hearing, and I get it more often subjectively, but when I objectively hear things, it sounds shouted at a distance. So if someone were out on the sidewalk in front of my house and shouting, and it was just barely loud enough for me to understand, that's how I hear things with my ears sometimes while I'm doing a reading. That's always spot on, 100% spot on, the information, whatever it is that I'm hearing. I'll just repeat it out to the client. But mostly it's subjective, and these are all memories of sounds, right? So I'll remember a song, I'll remember a name. I'm remembering the sounds of things, the sound of a car starting, the sound of utensils rattling in a drawer, the sound of drumsticks clicking together. So I'm not actually hearing it. It's the memory of things I've heard. I've never subjectively heard something and thought, I've never heard that before. What's that strange sound? It's always a memory of something I've already heard at some point in my life. So that's how that works for me. And feeling things, I also get subjectively and objectively. And this is an interesting thing. There's a couple things to say about this. So they're equally strong for me, subjective and objective. This is the one where feeling, I would say, because hearing for me seeing is way more subjective. Hearing is a little more subjective. Feeling is equal for me. I equally feel things where I'm aware the person I'm connected with was experiencing something, and then sometimes about half the time I actually feel physically in my body. And that's new experiences. That's not memories, because a lot of times I haven't felt like I felt the absence of an arm. And obviously I have all my limbs, and that was super weird, and it was someone who had lost an arm. I wasn't experiencing the loss of the arm. I was experiencing the absence of it in my day-to-day life. I've felt intubated. That's a terrible feeling. I literally felt like something was shoved down my throat, like a tube was shoved down my throat. And so here's the thing. A lot of mediums, this happens to a lot of us, but I've also seen in readings, and especially in practice circles or development circles, I've seen people a little troubled or disturbed by that, and they've said, I'm going to ask them to back this feeling off because it's so strong. I've never done that. I've experienced really strong, really unpleasant things, but I've never asked them to back off because good information has come from that. If you follow that experience in your head, more information about what the person in spirits, what happened to them, when you don't ask them to back off the experience. So there's a couple things I want to say about that. First of all, I allow that to happen. So no one in spirit can ever make you feel ill, can ever make you feel like really dizzy or like you've got something shoved down your throat or whatever. I allow it in a reading when I'm doing readings. And the reason I allow it is because it's temporary. I know it's not really happening. And it's temporary, really good information flows, and it's just something that I'm okay with. And I have to add to this feeling thing that, and I didn't put this under hearing or clairaudience, I'm putting it under feeling. I feel words. I want to say words. Now, sometimes I will hear names, for example. I get names various ways. Like I'll see everyone I ever knew named John, or I'll hear John or Jim shouted at a distance. But sometimes I want to make I want to say James, John, Jack, like there's a J-A name that I want to say. So I actually feel words, and it's not always names. But I have to include in that. I haven't heard anyone talk about that. I feel things. I want to say words. So, and I'll tell the client, I feel like I want to say something that sounds like, and that's almost always spot on as well. The last two, smelling and tasting, are the rarest for me. And it's also, I think it's probably the rarest for everybody because I rarely see people, I watch a lot of mediums, and I rarely see them talking about smelling things or tasting things. For me, smelling things is all memories. It's entirely subjective. Not entirely subjective. I've objectively smelled things with my nose. But it's mostly subjective, and that's the memory of smells I've already smelled. I've never subjectively thought, what am I smelling? That's such an odd smell. It's always something I've smelled at some point in my life, and it's the memory of that smell. A few times I have objectively smelled. It's interesting. They've been really strong. When I've experienced smell objectively, it's been really powerful. I've smelled my mother's perfume and hairspray, really strong. I know that's when she's with me. And then one time, or another time that I had a really strong objectively smelling experience, a friend of mine was in the hospital with pneumonia. And I didn't know what to do for that person. And I wanted to help. I wanted to do something, and I focused on them psychically, and I could smell urine really strongly with my nose. Like if you've ever been walking down a city sidewalk and someone's peed there and you can smell it, it was really a nasty smell. And that bothered me because I thought, I didn't know what to make of that. I didn't know how to interpret that, but I could smell urine with my nose, and it was really unpleasant, and it made me scared for that person's health. They eventually were fine, but what happened was I should have said something to their spouse because they actually had a kidney infection, and that's what led to their to pneumonia, to their lungs shutting down, which can be a related thing that I had no idea medically that was a thing. And so I regretted not coming out as psychic and saying something, but eventually that person was fine. So I have objectively smelled things, but mostly it's subjective. And then tasting for me, the last one, is entirely the memory of flavors I've had. I've never objectively tasted something in my mouth, but I've had very strong memories of flavors. And that's always led to good information. So that's how subjective and objective can work for people, for mediums when we're getting stuff. And I wanted to share a chart, and I suggest you make a similar chart because this was really, I didn't think about it this way until I made this chart. So I have the objective and subjective categories, and I put in all capital letters seeing on the subjective side and then nothing on the objective. I did have that one experience in my 20s where I objectively saw someone in spirit. It was one time. I've done over 850 readings, so I just left it blank because once out of that many just doesn't count. So subjectively, I see a lot. I get that a lot. Hearing, I put in both categories, but I put it in all caps in subjective and just lowercase in the objective category because I do hear things objectively, but mostly it's in my mind's ear is how I hear things. Feeling, I put all caps in both categories, objective and subjective, because I get things both ways, and then I included the words because I'm saying, I'm feeling with my mouth. I want to say certain words. Smelling, I put into both categories, but I put it in lowercase in both categories because I don't get smelled that often, but I do get it. So I put that in both. And then subjectively, tasting is just in the one category. and it's the memory of flavors I've already had at some point in my life. Objectively, I've never tasted anything. So looking at this chart, I thought this was really interesting to see how I get stuff. And now I'm going to work on the blanks or work on the lowercase ones because this is clearly where I need to spend a little more time if I wanted to develop more roundly as a medium. So I just thought that was really interesting. That's my thoughts. I think that's all I have to say on this subject. Hope that was interesting. Next week, and put in the comments below. I want to read how other people get things, or if this video made a difference in your life and you've realized, oh, I do get things this way, but not that way. And you're right, memories do happen, because I don't see a lot of us talking about memories coming up. I also get memories as situations to explain something where I once got a memory of a TV show where someone had embezzled a lot of money and that had happened to the person in spirit. So memories are another way that we get information. And then of course, is it clairsentience, where you just know something about someone? That happens too, but that's not part of this video. Anyway, next week, I want to talk about choosing a teacher. If you're a developing medium, I just want to touch on that subject because there are a lot of really good teachers out there, but they're not all right for you. And this is not a plug. I do not teach. I have no intention of teaching. I just want to talk about teachers, and I'm not going to name anyone specifically, even though I do have a couple of favorites, people that I really like. But I'm going to talk about their characteristics. Anyway, great. Thank you for tuning in this week. See you next week. Hope you enjoyed this one, and have a great week.